Welcome to Machine Minds, where technology and humanity meet. I'm your host, Greg Tarusian, founder of Samson Rose, a recruiting and search business focused on the robotics and AI industries. The Machine Minds show is where we dive deep into the intricate world of robotics and artificial intelligence. As a staffing industry leader with a passion for the frontiers of technology, I'm pleased to be bringing you intimate conversations with the founders, investors, and trailblazers who are at the heart of the AI and robotics revolution. In each episode, we dig into their journeys, the applications of the products they're working on, and the breakthroughs that are shaping our future. Join us as we explore how these machine minds are transforming the way we live, work, and understand our world. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a tech enthusiast, or just curious about this amazing field, you'll learn something new with each episode. Let's delve into the extraordinary. Let's delve into machine minds. Hello and welcome to Machine Minds. I'm your host, Greg Tarusian, founder of Samson Rose, your robotics talent search partner. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Yegor, co-founder and CEO of Instock. Thanks for being on the show today, Yegor.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. Let's jump into it. So let's start with you before we dive into Instock. You've had quite a journey before founding the company, co-founding multiple companies, actually, including one that was acquired by Google and others. Can you walk us through kind of like the arc of your career and what drew you deeper into technology and logistics?
Sure. So back in 2003, I was fresh out of college and working as an investment analyst, associate manager, basically in Ukraine, looking under every rock. Who can we invest in technology space? I was very fascinated by AI before AI as we know it today. And one of the lectures courses that I had in university was on computer vision, on structural methods of analysis. And if you remember, before sort of 2005, 2006, web was mostly pictures and text. And then with improvements in digital cameras, suddenly videos are on the web. And a lot of them, and YouTube happens, and Google acquires YouTube. So at that point, I decided, okay, let's do it. Let's jump into startup world instead of trying to invest startups, and let's do a product that can index videos and find faces and annotate, recognize faces, and give metadata to some of the biggest video content holders in the world. So that was the original idea, how the Viewdle started. And if you remember, resolutions were not great at that time, right? It's not your typical 4K video out of the iPhone today. So we started recognizing faces in videos, because in the video, if you have a scene, multiple seconds, you have a face in a frame, then you have it's 30 frames per second, so you have hundreds of frames where a face is visible under slightly different angles, and that's much more information for algorithms to learn to recognize that face. And surprisingly, it worked. It worked, and the faces were recognizable. My favorite demo at that time was we also were doing indexing of speech and sort of like show me George W. Bush speaking about oil prices, and immediately our system was giving exact seconds. You hit play, and George W. Bush is speaking about oil prices. That's the demo we were showing in the early fundraising stages. So that's Viewdle. That's facial recognition and video. Then we added still pictures. We added a couple of other modalities, and ultimately, I think several facial recognition companies who had good results were acquired, including Viewdle. That was purely sort of digital world, right? Has nothing to do with warehouse and logistics. But in 2009, remember we were doing due diligence in Japan, and I was sitting in an office in the center of Tokyo, looking through the glass window, and I just thought, look, in Tokyo, you have some robots that from if you are at a certain distance, you sometimes do not understand. Like, is this a human or a robot? Like, it's just some kind of simple task. Yeah, the robot there was waving to a traffic to avoid an obstacle on the road. And on one day it was a human, and on another day it was like a just a robot doing the same gesture. And I thought, okay, what are the areas in human mundane simple jobs that will be automated first and foremost? And I thought that, look, probably we can do a lot in just supermarket picking. So that's how I started a company called Zakaz in Ukraine. The US name was CartFresh back in 2010. So the model is like Instacart before Instacart, right? We quickly became the monopoly in Ukraine. We were operating in 5 cities, basically millions of orders. Uh, and it was the first time when I got into the actual operations of the company, like physical operations. So hundreds of pickers every day go to supermarkets, they pick products, they put them into cars. Then we go through POS, we pack, we stage, we load vans. Vans are doing delivery, vans are stopping, products are getting to your door, attended delivery, cash on delivery, which has its own interesting twists, um, especially in kind of so no credit cards are used. It's you have to collect cash at the end of the day. It's just a nightmare. But all of that brought me to real operations, real logistics, and how would you do it efficiently using the modern stack of software, like how software can help in operations. Then, to kind of get to the further stages of the arc, we expanded to Boston, Massachusetts with this model. It was pretty obvious that with the US labor costs, it's very hard to make unit economics work. And while we were doing our Series A fundraising, a young company called Takeoff Technologies approached us and said, "Look, why don't we join forces? Let's do M&A. You can take your U.S. part of the business and merge with us, and kind of leave Ukrainian part of the business aside." And that's what we've done ultimately. So I became
Oh, so that's
CTO of Takeoff. And then it's a takeoff journey from 2017 to 2020. Um,
interesting. Awesome.
so in takeoff, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious. Obviously, going from Ukraine to the US, building robotics on both sides now, how has that experience kind of shaped your perspective as a founder? And then also, I guess, like that commercial element as well, when you talk about unit economics in the US and how that compares to there.
Well, so in Viewdle, I spend a lot of time in the US, right? Living in your land, Santa Monica, Malibu. Um, and even before that, I traveled for a business in that investment firm that was working in 2003 to 2005. Um, my perspective shifted a lot from okay, what's technologies, what is cool to, okay, what's economical, what works, how do you create good unit economics for customer, what's the value? So my thinking became much more um, driven by dollars and the kind of benefit and the value rather than, okay, which part of the AI we can apply and how cool it will look on screen, right? So that is was a transformation. Of course, it's much more expensive to do anything in the US, like hire engineers or approach customers or run a pilot. So you have to be very careful with not spending. If you are not in a super hot area where maybe like some investors love you and you can just throw a lot of money on some big problem, and their just speed is everything. Um, there maybe you can kind of be less careful with efficiency, but otherwise in the normal state, in the normal business, uh, after expanding to the US, I was very careful with everything, expenses and what kind of economics it produce for customers.
Interesting. Sounds like that's a early lesson or early moment that taught you something super valuable in the entrepreneurial journey? Because you find some either inexperienced investors or people that are used to raising capital when it's super easy. They're very free with spending and not really watching the unit economics numbers or any focus on that commercialization. They just think more money is going to come and it doesn't matter about where we're at right now. We'll get there in the end.
Well, yeah, I mean, investors are doing their job. They're playing risky games, right? And you just see that different investors have very different like projections into the future, what the economics will look like. In our world of manual picking, manual fulfillment versus automated fulfillment, we have this benchmark of manual human driven picking. And that's a very tough benchmark, right? Like if you organize process well, you can achieve amazing results in terms of cost per pick with purely human labor and good organization. Then it's a different question how to scale that, how to scale, let's say, from one location to hundreds of locations. But you always have this benchmark, and therefore, when you're automating, you kind of it's relatively easy to calculate what kind of value you're creating.
Yeah, fair.
Like
let's bring it. Yeah.
Sorry, just to finish this, like if you bring new device categories, say into household, you brought some automation to household. How would you measure value creation? Like I'll take some silly example. Let's say I'm inventing new noodle maker, right, or coffee maker. Like how do I decide price point? I have to test it, right? So is $20 too expensive for mass market noodle maker or not? This analysis can be costly in itself.
Yeah, and if you get it wrong, that like stops adoption, or you're not able to reap as much of the profits as you probably wanted to if you shoot too low. So, yeah. No, I wanted to say let's bring it to the present day because I'm curious about Instock, and I'm sure you want to share a lot more about that. This one seems different, so I want to unpack Instock and everything there. So what is Instock for someone hearing about you guys for the first time, and what's the elevator pitch there?
Okay, so Instock is from a functional standpoint, it's a classical automated storage and retrieval system. We focus on small and mid-sized installations. We are laser focused on making better unit economics for customers in small installations. Small installations do not meet small customers, right? The biggest retailers in the world also may want to have multiple small installations because small just means closer to customer. You're going to brownfield, you're into urban areas, you're doing fulfillment where like 15, 20 minutes away driving time from your average customer. And there are certain changes you have to make in the architecture, and that's what we are delivering, right? The different architecture of ASRS so that the better economics is possible for small ASRS installation. It's still bins are occupying all available vertical height. Inventory is stored in bins. Bins are brought to pickers, to associates, but economics of all of that is very different thanks to new innovative components in the system.
Interesting. And how did you come to this product idea? Was it like an aha moment that led you to founding this company?
Well, not a single aha moment, but when we were installing systems in Takeoff, I was carefully looking at the economics of the whole process. And I saw that even taking into account like all of the benefits and all of the very good throughput of the system that was installed by Takeoff, the unit economics for customer didn't look stellar. Especially when you calculate total cost of ownership, because at the end of the day, normal owners and like executives, they say, what's the total cost and what's the total cost per pick? right? And some more advanced would say, okay, let's calculate total cost of ownership that is risk adjusted. Because sometimes you are asked to put some capex in, right? And you're asked to predict what kind of throughput and storage capacity do you need in the next 3 years in this location. And the smaller the location, the harder the prediction is, because like you have more fluctuations impacting relative to the size of location. Well, if you're on a huge warehouse and you're growing 3% a year, then that's no problem. Like you can make much better prediction. But if you're running a tiny MFC that is just 5,000 square feet and has 5,000 bins, and it's serving just like a 500 to 1,000 orders a day, it's much harder to predict what will be the flow in 3 years. So risk adjusted, it doesn't work. Even without risk adjustment, it didn't work. It was not good. And I thought, what needs to be done? How would I do the system? How would I change it so that the architecture works for me? And that's when we came to the main ideas behind Instock. So we want a very static infrastructure that can't break, right? So I want to install something once. I want installations to be cheap, and I want the installation to be expandable, at least into X and Y, right? Maybe you immediately occupy all available vertical height. It doesn't make much sense to not to in the very beginning, but at least it's expandable X and Y. So nothing can break in this static structure. And I want to minimize the number of moving parts in the dynamic component of the system. So I thought, what's the minimum? The minimum is 1, right? Very hard to imagine ASRS with no moving parts at all. But let's say it's a 1. So it's a 1 robot. So you have a single robot that moves in the system. Great. But how do you attack the other problematic part of the unit economics, which is maintenance? Because, when you're coming up with a new robot, it's very hard to achieve reliability day 1 or even year 1. Reliability is a hard problem. So we want to have an extremely maintainable system in a sense that the robot is so compact and so lightweight that you can, and so simple to use that you can trust customers to do operations like insert a robot into a system or take the robot out if it malfunctions. And therefore, we want to ship the robot to be more like a consumer electronic item rather than a heavy robot that you need a technician to install and configure.
Interesting. So what does actual installation and kickoff look like for your customer?
The installation of a rack, we call it grid, looks very much like if you would install pallet racking, right? Same contractors, 1 day of training, contractors can install our system. Contractors do not know anything about robotics, do not understand why they're installing this thing, what kind of thing will move inside. They don't need to know, right? They can do perfect job without this knowledge. And once grid is installed, the robots come in. Of course, we kind of oversee the initial intake of robots. And after that, we have to leave the room and the customer is doing all of the operations with the robots. We just oversee the site remotely. The site is, of course, very much observed remotely through video cameras and our system. It's very connected to the internet. But even before that, all of the site's aspects are modeled and checked in a simulation. And this plays a key role that before a single physical object starts movement towards the side of a customer, we have to model, simulate, design, and check everything online with a customer on a call. And that should be fast, efficient, simple process. So a lot of our work is around this designers and how easy and simple they are, and how efficiently you can onboard customers. So that's a hard part too.
It is a hard part, but it's also one of the parts that is a roadblock for onboarding new customers or having that adoption be mass adoption and also easy, because people, if they don't understand the technology or they don't have the technical people on board internally, sometimes that's a roadblock and they're like, well, it sounds too complicated or too much of a risk or expense to
Well, there are some powerful market forces right now that kind of push customers to learn even without you being present in the room, right? So let's say you're a third-party logistics company and your competitor installed some kind of automation, but it's already installed and it gives them opportunity to lower prices. Whether you're big or small, you have to do something about it, right? Otherwise, just no sense to continue and invest more or to grow in purely manual business. So somewhere around like, I think 15 to 20% penetration of ASRS into every segment, let's say third-party logistics company, you will see the snowball effect when I'm doing this, not because ASRS are cool, not because I want something shiny in my warehouse, but because my competitor, my colleagues have those systems and they see results. And that's very different. Like situation, you have a pool, you have customers calling you and asking, hey, like, can you do this better? What can you lower the price? Can you explain to me? And after that, it's only efficiency of your onboarding. It's not a roadblock. If explanations are, let's say, 1 hour call and you have 3 to 4 calls to do everything, then look, 4 hours of sales rep on calls, it's not such a big investment or cost of acquisition relative to everything physical. If you go install a system and there was some mistake made, and you have to reinstall, like I guarantee any operation of fixing a mistake on site would be much more expensive than 4 hours of sales rep on a call.
Definitely. Sounds like a key differentiator for you guys as well, the simplicity, ease of adoption.
I don't think we will be able to keep that differentiator in terms of other players do understand it and they invest also into simplicity of the onboarding, into simulation. It's just hard, right? But others may have just more capital to invest into this. So if we have some advantage right now, I don't think we will have it for too long. Where we can keep our advantage is in this model that our robot is lightweight and cost efficient, and we trust customers to do in-out operations with the robot. Because that, like, to catch up with this, you would need to change the architecture of the robot. It's not easy, right? If you're an established ASRS company and someone tells you, hey, your robot is 200 pounds, can you make it 90 pounds? Like, this is not a weekend project.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, there's quite a few players in the space, but it sounds like you guys are unique in that respect anyway.
In this respect, we try to push an envelope even further to make it even lighter. You know, the holy grail is 60 pounds. Well, like 60 pounds is interesting because that's a weight that can be carried or manipulated by most of the people in retail and warehousing. Like one person is enough. So there is a difference between one person for all operations and, okay, maybe 2 people for some of the operations. Well, it's not like it won't solve all the problems, right? If you are installing a TV in your home, right? It's a consumer device. Like most of the people don't call for help for installation of a TV, but it's a 2-person job at some moments, right?
Yes, yeah, for sure. No, it's so true. Yeah, interesting. I'm curious. Obviously, you told us about where the realization or awareness for robotics came in, but you don't have a hardware background, right? So now building
my co-founders,
Oh, okay, okay. I was gonna say, like, most people are like, oh, hard tech is hard, hardware is hard, and try and shy away from it.
It
But
is hard, and people don't understand like where is hard, right? You just hear this phrase, hardware is hard. Like, okay, I buy that, but where exactly? If I still
yeah,
want to do soft hardware, like, where exactly it's hard? Tell me.
yeah,
So I think I had uh, like early realization that look, it's a very much team sport, and you have to have sufficiently complete team in the very beginning. So we are six co-founders, and that may sound like a lot more than usual SaaS startup, right? I mean, depending on device category, maybe sometimes you can do it with just two co-founders, but we started with this set, and my co-founders, they have much more experience with hardware than I have, but you have never enough experience, right? Especially in hardware. Things are changing. Hardware is different, right? I mean, we started already from a premise that, look, it's a computer on wheels, right? So we're not involved in PLCs or any of this kind of fixed electronics for conveyors or automation systems. But even with this early statement that it's computer on wheels, it's still a very hard job to make those multiple computers on wheels behave well together.
yeah, yeah. Fair. That, I guess, this is a good segue into the behind the scenes elements of the company. So founding it 2022, it
No,
sounds like
2020.
oh, in 2020. Oh, okay.
2020. Yeah.
2020. Sorry. What was the hardest part about getting it off the ground in the early days, would you say?
So for us, there was a hard part, and it still is, that we are a distributed team. And that probably, if I would do it from the beginning again, I would try very hard to avoid any uh, distributed nature of the team when it comes to hardware, right? That's the hard thing. But there are, of course, many other very like hard, not easy components. One of those is we are doing something like multiple robots are working in the same grid, so it's a very dynamic multi-agent system, and the robots sometimes they pass near each other in a couple of millimeters, and they avoid obstacles very closely. And to make all of that work fast is quite a challenge. I think a lot of companies they underestimate how much effort should be put into the infrastructure so you could simulate and debug properly your own system. That's one of the things that was hard, but not obvious. That the things you take for granted in the software world, they would not work in the systems and hardware software combination, right? You have this analog factors, components, and to achieve something like reproducible run. Let's say you have 10 robots running. You want to reproduce the same experiment, right? You want them to behave exactly the same way. It's already problematic at this simple level, right? You have to invest into the infrastructure of your development and debug and process. So you would spend some reasonable amount of time in debugging and not like unreasonable. Like if you look inside automation system, you can find today that 80% of the code is about I don't know, some kind of exception. What do we do if this happens? That happens, some edge cases, as well as maybe 90% of development time was spent into just making basic use cases work. So that's a problem, and I think it can be improved significantly.
Interesting. Were there any decisions early on that you look back on and think, if we didn't catch this early, this could have killed the company?
Absolutely, we like the impacts of this may be seen years after. And that's the danger of it. That you think that it's going well, you're producing demos, the demos work, investors are happy, maybe even customer demos are fine, maybe proof of concepts are well, but if the elements and the culture of the development and debugging process of this typically distributed multi-agent system was not kind of laid into the background, then years after you will see that, oh, it's not, now that we lost the velocity, it's so slow. Every new improvement has this long cycle, or there is a problem with reliability, and it just takes a while to fix it. So I think that's not unique to, like, those challenges, not unique to our robotics. This is universal for multiple companies. And I think there is a collective accumulated knowledge and best practice, and there will be a kind of easier and better world, but today you have to do it yourself and understand it yourself.
That's true. Are there any beliefs that you had at the start when you first founded Instock that you've completely changed your mind about now?
Absolutely. One huge belief is that I can predict timelines of any hardware, software development.
If only.
Still to this day, some of my co-founders recall my predictions about when things will happen, and they laugh. And like, I'll give you an example. The first time we have components of the system arriving in a shipping container to California, to Oakland port, and we had to assess how many days it would take us to come up with this demo, to assemble it out of the components. Like, everything was predefined. We had a simulation, how it should look like. And I was saying, look, probably it's a 1 week project.
Yeah.
And we spent like another maybe 6 months for that demo to be repeatable. Because before that, everything was crashing and burning immediately the moment potential investors were stepping out of the room. It was very funny.
That is funny. Oh my.
So no, like, I doubt, like, I would love to learn and to know better the science of predicting timelines, because you have this universal problem. Like, if you have research, how do you predict research outcomes, right?
Right.
You typically cannot. Like, it's a creative process. But here, it's not that much about research. It's about how do you take a bunch of papers that are very good and you turn this research code and research result into production result. And that's what kind of, I had exactly the situation in Viewdle, in my first company. We've been doing the same exercise there. And so I kind of applying some of the learnings from that time, but it's still very unpredictable. Like, I don't know how to predict it with, let's say, 25% error rate.
It's tough. There's so many unforeseen things, before you get going that you probably wouldn't be able to account for.
It's interesting that I can much more better predict sort of efficiency per dollar or certain result, but not how much time it would take. Yeah. Because like with dollar, like, you can have more people working, less people working on it. And so the cost, I can predict better. But in the world of venture finance startups, velocity matters a lot, right? You, even in current times, after 2022, with all of with cost of money going up and people trying to save and people look who is more efficient, even to this day, you cannot substitute velocity with efficiency per dollar. Just because it becomes incompatible with venture funds and their timelines, right? If you would come and say, hey, here is a demo. It took us 7 years to come up with this demo, but we spent only $500,000. Most likely venture capitalists would not be extremely interested, right? So it's a normal business, it's a normal track, but just do it yourself, like bootstrap it, and don't raise venture money.
Interesting. Yeah, that's it. I've heard the viewpoint about the venture side quite a few times on this show, where people are like, there's either the self-funding, bootstrapping, grants, all of that stuff. Try and exhaust all of that family and friends rounds as much as you can before raising capital, even if you need to from the venture side, or just trying to get profitable or have revenue as soon as possible so you can reinvest into the business. And
if possible, that's a great idea. But for some, especially new categories of devices, it's very often not possible, or you just can't find the way to make it possible.
yeah, I mean, venture exists for that reason, really, doesn't it? And I think it's for some industries, for some projects, you don't need to rely on it, but others, like you said, it's not possible to navigate without.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears here, and I want to talk about the people side of things. Robotics are a team sport. I'm in the recruiting world, so I love this topic. And you mentioned before about like the dispersed team and everything, so I want to bring it back to that. But when you're hiring at Instock, especially those early team members, and even now, what traits do you really look for beyond a resume?
Well, beyond the resume, let me tell you in resume. So first and foremost, my first question that I ask almost everyone is, show me one production robot in the field that you contributed to. And what was your contribution? How significant that was? And you would be surprised, but very few people can show that. So there are everybody have done some project, right? Some projects in robotics who apply for a job, but it was something in the lab, something that never seen a light of the day, something that never had a single customer. So a lot of the project that just done, I would say, more or less as educational projects, and they seem to be commercial, but they never got into actual hands of users. And so, depending on that, if the answer is yes or no, I look. But even if the answer is no, let's say it's a young candidate, I'm looking to how determined and autonomous is the person, because it's a team sport. But at the same time, you have to have certain kind of grit in every of the team member, right? And so I'm looking for people who are, if I see a person who, let's say, had a hobby project and they've done it beginning to end and it works, that's a very good sign for me. So the person was able to bring something from zero to a working, let me say, prototype, himself, herself, and this is great. And then, of course, a single talented player doesn't mean it's a good team player. So that's the next thing I'm looking into.
Yeah, that makes sense. Has hiring in the US robotics industry kind of surprised you in any way?
It's just hard, right? Well, in the US, you have always competition. So if you have a talented person, let's say smart, someone out of college, there is a choice, right? You can work on this AI project or that project in robotics. So there are, like, people have choices, and it takes you energy to kind of to sell, to convince that the area where of your focus is actually sexy or sexier than those other areas that you hear all day, every day from the media. So that takes a more effort than I would say in, say, European Union when you're hiring there.
Yeah, fair. What's your opinion on great roboticists? Do you think they're built through academia, industry, something else entirely? I know you mentioned like personality traits like grit and everything like that. How do you think about that?
I think a great roboticist can come from anywhere, but if somebody sticked for a long time in academia, then the traits will there will be different habits, set of habits, right? You need to have someone who basically is not like someone who has satisfaction and joy from bringing product to people, because customers are at the end of the day why we're doing this, right? And very often people do the project for themselves and they're the first customer, and this is great, but you don't want to be their only customer, right? You want other customers. And when a person can bring device and can talk to customer, can see, can eliminate all of the ego, kind of extract all of the ego from the process and see that, okay, here is a problem. There is maybe something needs to be improved from a customer viewpoint. Then you can see immediately in person if they have these qualities. That's essential for any small robotics team. By small, I mean something like smaller than 50 people.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. What's your view on robotic startups over-indexing or over-focusing on being the next shiny thing or for prestige or glamour instead of trying to solve for scale and simplicity and be a commercial product?
Look, I think some of those prestige and shiny oriented behaviors, they're coming from the fact that you need to be venture financed, right? It starts to be a kind of beauty show, and I don't think over optimizing for what the investors want to see actually works. Because when you're over optimizing for that, you are kind of not spending on being good or excellent in where you want actually to be excellent, right? I think it's easier to be excellent. It's never easy, but it's a better, let's say, a better strategy is to be excellent where you can be, and then just find one investor, two investors in the world that can understand you.
Right.
It may mean a lot of rejection, just tons of rejection, right? Like it's very frustrating. It will. It's super frustrating. Like when you had no number 75, you think like, am I crazy or all of them are crazy? But this is the moment when your confidence is, when it's a real test for your confidence and understanding. And if you believe in that you are right, then you just keep going and you keep looking for those just maybe one or two investors in the world who can understand what you're doing, because you thought it through. It's unconventional, but but you think you're right.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you touched on that, because we have quite a lot of like first time founders or aspiring founders that listen, and the rejection or amount of rejection, the amount of no's that you can get when you're looking for funding. Is it funny you use that number 75? You're the second leader in a startup I've spoken to. Yeah, in the last week that mentioned 75 because they just went through a funding round.
I mentioned 75 only because it was from our pre-seed.
Well, yeah, they just went through the same thing, but
75 no's for one yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good data point, a good realization for a lot of people who haven't been through that journey to know, like, don't get disheartened after like one or two. Have thick skin. Aim for 100. At least.
Well, yeah, and also you have to put a weight on how much you think the people you're talking to understand the space, right? So if you're talking to some 75 people who you think they understand the space really well, and you've got 75 no's, probably there is something wrong with the idea, right? But if it's just more or less like you take 75 hard tech investors, because just hard tech is about all and nothing, then it's fine. I believe it's only when you speak to people who really understand the depth of what you're doing, then you kind of put more weight on their yes or no.
Right. I'm conscious of time, so I'll try and fly through the rest of the stuff that I wanted to cover with you. But let's zoom out for a second and talk about what's on the horizon in the industry and everything like that. Where do you think the biggest breakthroughs in robotics are going to come from over the next sort of 5 to 10 years, in your opinion?
Well, if you define robotics as some kind of mobile mechanism, then I hope that our bet will play out well, right? And we bet on that you can have this machine, static machine, but a tiny robot multiplied n times can do an amazing high performance job within that machine. And then you can kind of manipulate that tiny robot easily, relatively tiny, right? So that was not, there are very few, like I know only one example in the warehousing logistics robotics space where the company achieves more or less success with this approach. Only one example. And I hope we will be another example for the domain of automated storage and retrieval system. That's a kind of hard problem to solve. In the other areas of robotics, I mean, I think that, it seems to me that there will be some kind of a separation between people who do good hardware and people who do intelligence for this hardware. For example, I can see maybe like Asian companies doing better and better hardware faster and faster, be it humanoids or some kind of other moving agent. But then other group of companies would overlaying intelligence and making that hardware more and more capable. Maybe tuning for very few models of hardware, but and I guess from this separation, if I think it can be done efficiently, and from that separation, from that specialization, you can get amazing results faster than we think, right? So say robots with eyes, with cameras, can visually answer basically any question we can imagine, right? So like from where are my socks to like how to organize this. I think that would be a breakthrough in itself. And even if the end effectors are still human hands, just by giving this like semi-ideal instruction, what to do, how to do, where to do, when to do, this will be already a breakthrough. And so I understand, like I spoke maybe in abstract terms, but that's because it's about the future, right? Like I cannot know which device exactly that would be, but I would love to have ideal instructions spoken to my ear just because the robots are, let's say, around me.
Yeah.
All of them have cameras. Almost all of them have cameras, right? But that information is not right now aggregated and not, intelligence is not applied to it in any kind of meaningful, aggregated way.
Yeah, it's a good point. And, I've asked this question before, and some of it's been like products or systems that don't even exist right now, and in this way. So yeah, it's changing so fast that I wouldn't be surprised if things like this come around. Are there any areas that are overhyped, trends in automation that you think of, or that you see, like AGI, humanoids, drones, anything you're skeptical about?
No, I'm not skeptical about anything. It's just I think when people say, "Oh, that will be in every home, in every house," what's very often is kind of swept under the rug is this question of maintenance and the total cost for the customer. Because like if you bring me humanoid tomorrow and you say, "Hey, it can do all of those chores in your house," like okay. If that humanoid breaks on day 3, and I have a 1 hour call with support line, and somebody asks me to pay even $10,000 for humanoid, I'll start to question, do I need so it's a separate problem to make things economical for the end user, especially if it's just a regular consumer. That is a super hard problem for anything that moves. There are only two categories that achieve some kind of a success as a mobile device within the mobile robot within the consumer's hand. These are drones, right? Quadcopters, for example, and vacuum cleaners. Very few. Like you take all of the other attempts, there is no mass adoption because like human tasks are there are a lot of them, but you need to do them very well economically.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, last question before we wrap, kind of like an all-encompassing one. What is a piece of advice that you wish someone would have told you 10 years ago when you were on this journey? If there's like a big lie that we tell first-time founders or pointing you in the right direction on this journey?
Well, I would say if let's say you're a founder of some kind of hardware software company, right? Yeah, I would say, look, you have to build it from the beginning in kind of like friendship and very close relationship with the customer so that you can be very close to the customer and their problem, but at the same time have luxury not to install anything too early. In the hardware world, that plays a very special role. It's always true, even with software, but in hardware, it's a very special role because you don't want to debug things on the territory of customer. Or if you are debugging, that should be fast and swift, and you should not repeat it with your first 10 customers, right? That's a major trick to increase velocity and to remove some of the things that slow down hardware teams relative to software teams. Software teams can move with lightning speed relative to hardware teams. So you want to remove everything, every obstacle from the speed of a cycle of development in the hardware. And that can be a major obstacle. Not having necessity to debug things on the client territory, to keep an SLA, right? Because if you're a small company, everyone will be focused on, oh, this is the first customer, this is a holy grail that we have to keep it, we have to make everything perfect for SLAs to work. And that by itself can slow you down. You still need the first customer, right? It goes without saying. Absolutely. But you have to find a way to not slow you down and kind of get to the point of scalability while you still keep improving very fast.
Interesting. That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. And look, thank you again for being on the show. Where can the guests, where can our listeners find out more about you, Instock, and follow your journey?
So there are many Instocks, meaning a company name, but there is only one, instock.com. And there you have everything, even API documentation is open. We're a small company, but we are always very glad to meet engineers who are fascinated and captivated by this category, right? By this principle of, look, you can have a machine that exerts incredible performance inside because of one moving type of element, and it's mostly software driven. So through purely software changes, you can increase the performance of the whole machine.
That's powerful. Yeah, very unique. Look, Yegor, thank you so much again for being on the show and sharing your journey and all your wisdom and insights. I really appreciate it. And I hope to keep in touch and help support you however I can in the future.